we are very lucky again to have all the way from the US, the amazing Divya Siddarth, the Executive Director of the Collective Intelligence Project, presenting Speed to Safety. Please give her a hand.
Hello, delighted to be here on another gray London day from California. It is rough. So as mentioned, I run the Collective Intelligence Project. We're a research lab and nonprofit headquartered in SF, although I actually started it when living in London. And the reason I left Microsoft's Office of the CTO in 2021 to start CIP is this, which is what I think about as the transformative technology trilemma. So I've been in AI for a while, around Silicon Valley for longer than that, and was noticing as we look at what the future of AI in particular might hold, that a bunch of very clear kind of camps were forming in what that future should look like. And the two major ones that I'm quite familiar with from SF were around the dichotomy between progress and safety. So there are a lot of people who say we need to accelerate AI at all costs. This is going to be fantastic for people, and safety slows us down, right? It makes things slower, it makes things annoying, it's bureaucracy, it's all of these things that a lot of us don't like. And on the flip side, I think there's a feeling that, this is a really dangerous technology that we don't know a lot about. And so let's focus on keeping it safe. And if that means a lot of people can't access it, if that means we don't have a lot of participation, if that means it slows things down, that's great, right? Because we don't know what we're getting into. And I think there's real truth to both of these perspectives, but what's often missing from the conversation is this third pole that I've nicely put on top, which is participation. And I think the bridge between having a future that does bring a lot of progress and yet one that is safe actually comes through participation, actually comes through us understanding what types of progress are good for people, and on the safety side, understanding the actual impacts of the system that we're building. And so I started CIP to kind of bring in that third pillar of participation into the conversation and try to actually directly build participation into how we're structuring model architecture, into how we're building AI, into how we're thinking about AI policy. Because obviously the idea of participation isn't new, it's kind of the oldest human idea in the book, but what does it look like to take something so core to what it means to build the future like participation and bring it into a conversation that is often happening in rooms very far away from the people who we want to use this technology, the people who are building it, and all of that. So the goal of CIP is to accelerate positive AI in the interests of the people, right? And to use public input to do that. What do we actually do? Well, we, since I started it, have been running what I like to believe are scalable experiments to accelerate safe AI through participation with partner organizations. So we don't tend to build our own technology in-house. We work with external partners to try to build participation into their pipelines that already exist. I'll talk through some of our projects, but I think I just want to emphasize this core theme of bringing participation into the conversation productively. Because I think while we have done a lot of work on this, so have many of you. And that work needs to be combined into a movement around participation, and we're excited to talk about our partnership with Prolific to do that after this. So I'll walk through some of the projects that I think kind of speak to what it looks like to bring participation into the conversation. So we started out actually on public input for risk assessments, which was an early collaboration with OpenAI. And the question there was really, why is it that we have a lot of conversations about risks, about safety, about all of these kinds of questions outside of the people who are actually using these technologies. And we did samples of the US public to try to understand what are the risks that people are actually facing when they use frontier models, what are the concerns that they have, and we've run this process iteratively over the last couple of years and learned that actually the number one fear people have is around over-reliance. And so as opposed to specific concerns like labor impacts or misinformation, surveillance, any of that, people again and again came to us and said, I just don't want to be reliant on a system I don't understand. And so a lot of the fix here is around transparency, right? Instead of having to actually change the model itself, it's around the transparency of how do you understand what it is that you're using and you understand the infrastructure that it's built into. So I think that is one of the goals of participation, is to increase transparency. Another kind of model developer process we did was with Anthropic, which was called collective constitutional AI. And here, we try to understand what are the values that AI models are built on top of, and who gets to decide those values. So the last panel ended on this, I think, really interesting question about sovereign AI. And obviously, a lot of sovereign AI is around who owns compute or where do data sets come from. But a bunch of the reason people tend towards wanting, at least in a vibe sense, sovereign AI is because they feel like AI technologies are being built on values that aren't their own. And I think there is truth to this, but it doesn't have to be this way. So our process with Anthropic included, thousands of people from around the US co-writing a constitution for Claude, retraining Claude on the public constitution. And we actually showed in that small graph at the bottom, but you can read the paper online, that the public model performed better, was less biased, and also as performant across all measures as the original Anthropic Claude model. And so there are ways in which people actually prefer the outcomes of participatory AI compared to regular models. We've also done a lot of work more on the policy side, and so in the UK and in Taiwan, we've looked at election integrity, anthropomorphization. What are the ways in which we can actually understand how people's interactions with models should shift our policy priorities? It's less core to what we're talking about today, so I won't dwell on those. And finally, I think one thing that's really important to understand is a lot of the data that we're using to train models is data that already exists on the internet, right? So we worked with groups like Creative Commons to say, a lot of this data has been created by people over the past decades, hundreds of years, if you count, books and things like that. How do we actually make sure that those people are involved in the decision-making over that data when the licensing doesn't hold up against a lot of privatization that's coming around, right? So our work with Creative Commons is around how do creators get involved in downstream effects of models? I wanted to run through all of that because a lot of that work allowed us to understand where some of the biggest gaps in participation are. And I think a few places where there are huge gaps in participation are, one, around global input. And so as we all know, it's much easier to get input from places like the US and the UK over Europe than it is from different places around the world. And yet, a lot of the fastest AI adoption is actually happening in the global south, for example. A lot of the biggest impacts that AI can happen are outside of these countries. And so a lot of our focus is around how do we take some of these processes that we've piloted as well in the US and the UK and actually take them to around the world. And second, how do we build in, now that we have a lot of models and we actually have a plurality of frontier models for different use cases, try to understand the values that each of these models capture as is and better compare them. And so with that, our most recent project is with Prolific and another organization called Remesh. I believe Dan from Remesh spoke earlier, called Global Collective Dialogues. And the goal here is actually to run iterative processes. So every couple of months, we do benchmarking from people around the world to try to understand, what are the actual impacts of AI in their lives? And so are you using this? How do you feel about it? What are you using it for? Is it affecting your job? All of those kinds of basic questions that we're actually essentially flying blind on around the world, by the way, which is crazy. And so trying to fill in some of that data that we need to have to make good decisions. But also asking about, what would you like the future to look like? What would you do in these different kinds of scenarios? So filling in the qualitative data that is more around trying to allow people to steer the future, right? So one, we want to understand what's going on. To make good decisions in any space, you have to understand what's going on. But second, we want to give people a bit of understanding about what might come, and in those future scenarios, what do they actually want to see? The data of our initial processes is online. We're going to build public data sets, so it's all open sourced. Would encourage you to look at it if interested, and we'll keep this updated as we continue running these processes. And I think one of the most interesting things to me that I wanted to sort of leave you all with is I get emails about once a week from someone building a small application, running a nonprofit in a civil society organization somewhere in the world. And they will email me and basically say, we heard about AI. We found your name by Googling random things online. And we're very worried about the future. We don't understand what's going to happen. We think it's probably important. And we're not sure what our role is going to be. And I wish I had something better and clearer to tell those people, because they're right? Like, there are major transformations coming. We really aren't sure as a society how to deal with them. It's really not clear that we're going to do it in a way that helps people equally around the world. It's true. And while it is important that we directly build, I think, public feedback into models, while it is important that we build it into policy, I think there is a really core open question about what does it really look like to build the future in a way that includes everyone. And one of my favorite things, not just about these processes, but about running participatory processes in general, is that it helps people understand what the future looks like and what their role in it might be. And there is so much more of that that is necessary than what I think we're currently doing. And so, these are just some of the quotes that I love around people trying to come to terms with what this means, what it means for them to potentially have power in this future, what it means for them to be missing power in this future, and what they want to do about it. We aren't the organization that's going to be able to say, here's how you can solve this problem. I wish we were. But it is true that I think we all need to have answers to these kinds of questions. We want people to better understand themselves and the technology after participating in these processes. And I hope that that's something that everyone in here can think about as we really do build the future, because it's a huge responsibility, but it can also be really amazing. That's all. Thank you.